Good morning, everybody. I'm going to begin the process at this point. I would like to welcome you to the first of the virtual workshops sponsored by the Fair Housing and Civil Rights Conference. My name is John Fisher. I'm going to be kind of the overall host for this particular workshop. This is the first of a series of workshops we're going to be doing between now and when we actually have the conference take place in the fall. It became very clear to us early on that really there is, this is a very special time. All of the issues we normally deal with at the conference are there. I mean, certainly recent events have underlined that for us. But above and beyond that, there's also been the shadow of the COVID-19 and all the questions having to do that with that kind of hanging over our heads. Now, again, this is not intended to be a how-to on how to set up a language access plan. It's really just trying to talk about what happens with language access under these special conditions. In July, we will be offering a special workshop for those people who want it on how to do a language access plan if you don't already have them. That will be posted on the conference workshop. Okay, so let's start out with no further ado. This is a workshop on language access questions amid the COVID-19 crisis. Our presenters today are Iris Coloma-Gaines and Andrea Park, both of whom are attorneys with the Massachusetts Law Reform Institute. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Iris. You're up.
Thank you, John. I'm going to share my screen. I want to make sure that everybody can see it. Thank you, everyone, for being here today to talk about language access during COVID-19. I just wanted to go over the goals, what we'll be covering today, our objectives. We'll talk briefly about the immigrant population in the US and in Massachusetts. We'll talk about the sources of language access law. And we'll also provide some examples of providing access during COVID-19 and what different organizations have done during this time to ensure that folks are getting language. Okay, so what is the immigrant population in the US? So this is data from the 2017 US Census American Community Survey. And as you can see, we are a nation of many, many immigrants. And different states have higher concentrations than others, but we definitely are becoming more and more a nation of immigrants. So that begs the questions, why are language access rights so important? As I mentioned, we're becoming a majority minority country. In Massachusetts, for example, there's 8.8% of the population in 2013 spoke a language other than English at home. Language access, it provides access to decision-making. Otherwise, a person could unknowingly waive their rights. And when language access is not provided, it's considered discrimination based on someone's national origin because their language derives from their national origin. And this is a pie chart of limited English proficient population in Massachusetts. As you can see, there's a large number of Spanish speakers, but also a growing number of other language minorities in Massachusetts. So the importance of language access is increasing as states' populations increase more with language access minorities. So the law that governs language access is Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, which prohibits discrimination based on race, color, or national origin in programs or activities that receive federal financial assistance. So the key here, the key word is national origin. As I said, language derives from your national origin, and that's why if you're not provided, if you're getting services from a program that receives federal financial assistance and you're not being provided services in your preferred language, then you are being discriminated against based on your national origin. And although we're not going to talk in depth about folks that are deaf and hard of hearing, I do want to just mention that the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990 is the civil rights law that prohibits discrimination based on disability. So this law says that persons that are deaf and hard of hearing have to receive effective communication in employment, state and local governments, and places of public accommodation. So who is a limited English proficient person? So this is a person who has a limited ability to read, write, speak, and or understand English. It can also be the family member of an English speaker who is involved in the care of that person. And the person doesn't have to be limited in all speaking, reading, and writing and comprehending. So for example, you might be a person who can speak English, but your understanding might be more limited than your ability to speak it. Or you might be able to speak and understand it, but when it comes to very important issues that you need to read or sign something, you need someone to interpret. So all of those scenarios are considered, for any person, that person would be considered a person of limited English proficiency, which we call LEP. And so different agencies have flexibility in addressing people's needs, but that flexibility is based on the number of limited English proficient persons in that community, the available resources in order to provide language access to that community. But because there's flexibility, it really should not diminish and should not minimize the obligation that those needs need to be addressed. Those agencies need to take reasonable steps to ensure access. So a recipient of federal funds is an entity that receives federal financial assistance or operates a program activity. So that includes all recipients and subrecipients of organizations. So it also includes grants, subgrants, loans, equipment, federal property, whether it's leased or provided, and personnel. So that covers lots and lots of agencies. So there might be an agency that you deal with that only a sub part of it is is funded by federal monies, but that agency would be subject to the requirements of Title VI when it comes to language access. And just some other important terms, interpretation versus translation. And interpretation is the oral communication from one language into another. And of course, translation is the rendering of the written text from one language to the other. And the law says that vital documents are the documents that need to be translated. And a vital document is considered one that contains information that's critical for meaningful access to a program by limited English proficient persons. So, I mean, I'll have another slide that covers that, but that's anything from applications to denial notices, notices on a decision made in your case, if it's like a application for benefits or that of that nature. So this U.S. Supreme Court in 1974, Lau v. Nichols, was a case that held that that the school district needed to provide supplemental English instruction or instruction in their own language to limited English proficient students in order to have meaningful access to the programs. So this is basically the case that states that children who are English learners must receive supplemental instruction in their own language in order to have meaningful access to a free and public education here in the United States. There's another Supreme Court case that has affected language access that was back in 2001 that it held that no private right of action to enforce disparate impact regulations under Title VI unless there's intentional discrimination. And the Supreme Court established that the private right of actions need to be established by Congress, but some states have restored this right by passing laws that provide a private right of action. And the important thing to remember is this is only in disparate impact cases and not in disparate treatment cases, which is different Let me just see if I can, sorry. Oh, no, I don't know how to get rid of that. Sorry. Tyler, can you tell me how to get rid of that? Sorry about that.
I'm
Maybe
not
I just-
exactly sure. You might have pressed something.
Okay, okay. Okay. Also, in 2000, President Clinton passed Executive Order 13166, and this was providing further guidance on language access to all the federal funded programs that had the obligation to provide it. It specifically provided that each program had to implement their own language access plan that would determine the services they would provide, how those services can be accessed by folks, and also a person in charge at the agency of making sure that this language access plan is updated on a regular basis. So Executive Order 13166 was just more guidance for federal funded programs in order to provide language access in a more meaningful way. So Mass law also prohibits discrimination based on national origin, which includes language access. There's also an executive order in Massachusetts, as well as language access guidelines to improve access for LEP persons, reduce the disparities and delays in providing language access, and to increase effectiveness of the agencies and public satisfaction when it comes to language access. So a limited English proficient person has the right to use public programs and communicate in their preferred language without cost or delay. So if a person wants to get services from the Department of Transitional Assistance, they can set a language preference. They can let that agency know what their language preference is at the get-go when they apply for services, and that agency needs to provide information in that in the preference that the LEP person has expressed. They have a right to interpreter without cost to them that's qualified and trained in the subject, who is impartial, and that ensures the person understands what everyone is saying in a hearing or in a meeting. And again, vital documents, as I mentioned before, they have to be in the most common languages of the limited English proficient clients likely to be served in that community. So this is a little bit more information on what should be included in a language access plan. It should be a simple document that needs to be shared with all staff and to make sure and making sure that it's implemented. So there are 4 factors to determine how to create a language access plan. And the first is the number or proportion of LEP persons in the region. So the language access plan should be spelling out what the process is to identify the individuals who need the language services in that particular community. That can be through surveys to LEP individuals. It can be to surveys to community partners who serve LEP individuals. It can be through all kinds of there's no limit on the creative ways that an agency can try to determine the numbers of LEP persons in their own community. The government allows for flexibility on that. And the frequency, the next factor is the frequency of LEP persons interacting with that particular agency or organization. So that's something else that needs to be in the language access plan. Like, how are they going to determine the frequency of that contact? Through keeping records of their own and figuring out, the frequency of the contact in order to determine what languages are in that community of the folks that are frequenting that particular agency, so that they have those languages available when needed. A process to access interpreters and language access assistance services, whether it be through hiring of folks who are qualified to be interpreters who speak the native language of folks in the community, whether it be a language access line, or whether they call a particular company who has live interpreters that come to the agency. All of those things need to be included in the language access plan. And then a determination of what vital documents need to be translated. and how to find those documents. So if I'm an LEP person reading a language access plan, I want to know how to access those documents. And that would go to the nature and importance of the actual services provided by that agency. And then lastly, the resources that are available to that agency in order to provide the language access. It's not an excuse, a lack of resources to totally not provide language access. That is something that needs to be in the balance of weighing all these factors together in this analysis. However, it does come into play. But the most important thing, I think, is designating a person in the office to monitor and update the plan, because if the plan is written and it's a great plan, but it's not referred to by staff, it's not implemented, then the plan, it's as if the plan doesn't exist. It really needs to be something that's a live document in order to be effective for language access to LEPs in that community. Ooh. I don't know what, oh, here it comes. Okay. So who's an appropriate interpreter?
Actually, Iris, let me just jump in for a second. This is John. Again, just remind people that we will, if you want to know how to have a workshop on how to do a language access plan, we will be offering that sometime in July.
Thanks, John. So who is an appropriate interpreter? An appropriate interpreter is one professionally trained in a particular substantive subject, who is qualified and impartial. Not appropriate would be family members, especially minor children, someone who doesn't know the subject or terms, unqualified to translate, or is partial. So I'm sure we all know of situations where family members have been used. This is really inappropriate at all times, but especially in cases like domestic violence, where a minor child is interpreting. These are all things that are very highly private and highly vulnerable situations for folks, and they need professional interpreters to be in the room so that they can freely speak about what is going on with their case. So what are vital documents? As I started mentioning before, these are documents that have to be translated. So it must be provided in their native language. Applications to participate, complaint and intake forms, notices of rights, written notices of rights, appeal letters, any determinations, assessments used to determine eligibility, school documents, content on websites. All of these are vital documents. Not in every single program, but you need to do an assessment of every single program. In a school situation, content on a website is very, very important for English learners to be able to have full access to fair and appropriate education. So what does this all mean? What it means is that limited English proficient individuals have the same right as anyone else to use public programs in their own language. So that means in all schools, in all courts, public housing, public programs, and in most hospitals, doctors' offices, and administrative agencies. The staff of public programs must speak in the person's language, help them as quickly as they can, and respect the client's culture. There has to be cultural sensitivity woven into the language access, because that is a very important aspect, and it's all part of providing language access. So in summary, Title VI is the law that requires recipients to provide meaningful access to LEP individuals. They have to have written LEP plans and policies and procedures in place that clearly state how they're going to meet their obligation to provide language access. And federal agencies can investigate complaints by limited English proficient persons to enforce Title VI protections. And in Massachusetts, persons can also make complaints at the state level with the funding agency or the Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination. So now I'm going to turn it over to Andrea, who's going to talk a little bit about language access during COVID-19.
Thank you, Iris. Thanks everybody for being here and in this really weird situation that we're all in. And I think it's appropriate we're talking about this on Zoom, because how else could we do it? So as everyone here, I'm sure, is experiencing and kind of living every day in your work, everything has changed during this past couple of months. And it's been so hard. I'm sure, I know that a lot of you are doing a lot of different things in different spaces, but everyone is kind of involved in the response in some way. And things are just moving so quickly, and trying to figure out and keep up with everything that's been happening and what we're supposed to be doing. And is this really, the way this is supposed to work? And it's hard. So I think it doesn't need to be said that this has changed everything about our lives, both work, the work that we do, and also for our own lives. And language access is no different. And this is a new reality. It's clear that it's going to be with us for a while. And so I think we've settled into this routine a little bit. And I think we definitely need to start thinking about how we're going to use this as an opportunity and think about some creative ways to do better. I think, as Iris said, there are language access plans. There's a pretty good legal framework for what is supposed to happen. But of course, on the ground, things look very different. There's a lot of agencies and, government services that are underfunded. And it's hard to really say, there's a lot of agencies that are under a lot of strain. And so it's really difficult to know how to prioritize which of these things needs to happen first, which one is more important. And there's a lot of difficult conversations. Just as one example, we were trying to do something with one of our housing administrating agencies, and we had said, okay, no children can interpret. And someone in our, an advocacy group said, sometimes we want the children to interpret. I mean, there's times in which the time that passes between having an interpreter, if it's an emergency situation, means that we need to give people the option of saying, I would rather have this person interpret than wait another 4 hours and have something else happen. So it's very complicated. But I do think that we need to take the lessons that we're learning now, kind of take charge of that as people who know how these systems work, and figure out some best practices. So we thought it would be helpful. You can go to the next slide, Iris. Thank you. To talk about an example from our perspective. So Iris and I, as John said, we both work at Mass Law Reform, which is a legal aid organization in Massachusetts, but we're not a direct service organization. Those are the partners who we work with, and they do the cases on the ground, the civil legal aid cases. But we are in a policy center, so we do backup and support, and I'm a housing and homelessness attorney at Mass Law Reform. And as we thought about, what are the ways in which, trying to figure out language access during COVID has changed our work, there was the big thing that certainly I've been working on, a lot of people across the state have been working on, and country, is the moratorium on evictions and foreclosures. And so we thought we would kind of use this as an example of all the different ways in which we have had to think about it and engage our partners in also making sure that they are being mindful of all kinds of things, and very importantly, language access. And because I think it does touch on the different aspects of why this is hard during this time. So like many jurisdictions, Massachusetts passed a moratorium on evictions and foreclosures on April 20th. It was negotiated in the State House for a good month. And that was its own COVID experience, because the legislature couldn't be in the same place. They were trying to figure out remote hearings. And then those of us who were trying to do outreach were just doing lots and lots and lots of emails and phone calls, and sometimes passing messages back and forth, because the legislators had not worked out what to do. And obviously everything that was in front of them was an emergency. So once that, we had some time to think about that and work on it and prepare. And when that happened, there was a job that from our perspective we needed to do, which was to really get the word out. So that's that community outreach bubble. And then now we've kind of moved into the rental assistance. Like, there's been a big uptick in people seeking the rental assistance that we are lucky to have in the state. And then the court aspect of it. And all of these have different language challenges. So if you go to the next slide, please. So one of the first things that we did was, on the left here is a screenshot from our website, Mass Legal Help, where we have lots of information, just kind of plain English and other language information on different, aspects of civil law that we cover. And we have a whole new coronavirus section. And this is the fact sheet page. So the first thing we did was create a fact sheet that outlined the contours of the law, what it does, what it doesn't do, who's covered. And because the first thing we said was people need to know that this exists, because there had been a lot of, you know, rumors and just a lot of misunderstanding. And we knew that it would be really important to get this out in as many languages as possible. So as quickly as we could, if you look on the right side of the page, our website, to the extent we can, has buttons in languages where you can press and that the entire page gets translated. And yep, there they are. And I hope that there's a few more languages have been added, but we try to do those in the most needed languages in the state. And we do this with a service. So I know that a lot of places kind of resort to Google Translate, which is probably better than nothing, but we do try to do a more natural translation and make those available. And then we also work with a lot of community partners. So we have a number of community organizations and tenant organizations who we partner with. And we said to them, and a lot of different service partners and organizations, to take the information on our fact sheet, and we put it on our website because we knew that we might need to make some updates, and so we wanted it to be current. And we told them, you know, take the information, put it in the form that works for you. And so on the right here is a flyer that one of our community partners, Lynn United for Change, in the city of Lynn, Massachusetts, which is a predominantly immigrant, pretty low income city north of Boston. And they have a lot of people who, you know, just are not going to go into the court and seek out information and wouldn't know that this was happening. And what they typically do in Lynn with this community group is they do a lot of canvassing, and that obviously had to be scaled back a lot. And so what they did was they got, you know, they took the information, they translated it, they put their number at the bottom and said, if you need help, if you're in these areas, you can call this kind of network of tenant organizers. And they just tried to send it as many places as they could. They sent it to health centers, knowing that a lot of their members were also probably getting medical care there. And they coordinated with a couple of grocery deliveries, like food drops that people were doing for food donations, and just stuck a flyer in there just to make sure that people knew that the moratorium existed. I mean, that was our first order of business, was to say, hey, there's another law here that protects you, because we knew that they were really a lot of people who were going to be, that was the part where things were moving quickly. We knew that people couldn't pay their rent. We knew that landlords were worried that because they wouldn't get rent, they couldn't pay their mortgage. And we wanted to protect the most vulnerable people, who were often the ones who wouldn't know how to kind of assert their rights. And yes, Bryant, we did pay, we did pay for a service that we use to do certain translations, especially for legal documents. We found that it's important to make sure that the language, because we do try to make it plain language, we want it to be accurate without being too complicated. So we did pay for that. Okay, so the next slide. So that was outreach, and that outreach is still going on. I mean, there was a new survey that came out yesterday that said, like, a lot of people just still have no idea that there is a moratorium, and now we're looking towards the end of it. So, so the next phase of this, that has a part of it that has come up, is that there is a rental assistance program in Massachusetts that is administered by our state Department of Housing. And it's administered through 11 different agencies, of which Wayfinders, where John is one of them. And each system is regional, and it serves, you know, it's not a big state, but it is there's a lot of different parts of the state. Obviously, everybody knows Boston is a big metro area, but there are also, where John is, and even further west, are quite rural, and there's a lot of different transportation challenges. So everyone had to figure out how to do things remotely, including doing the intake in a time when suddenly there was a pretty big spike in applications for this assistance. So we in legal services and our community partners have also found ourselves getting quite involved in this resource. It's called RAFT, Rental Assistance for, or I can't remember what it stands for actually, Families in Transition. Rental assistance for families in transition. And we're hoping to get a big increase in that budget, but we're also worried that if there is a big flood of people, like if we do get the money we need to try to at least make a dent in the arrears of the many, many thousands of people who are behind on their residential, thank you, Natalie, behind on their rents and mortgages, that, you know, are these regional agencies going to be able to handle all of those? And we worry about, and the agencies as well worry about who is able to get access to that, and language is a big part of that. So where previously a non-English speaker may have been able to come to the office and be able to speak to someone, a staff person in their language. If it's now an online system, if it's now just a phone and you leave a message, and if you don't have an email address, what happens? What do you do? And there's just limited staff to do all of this outreach to be able to get there. So this is another aspect in which we have a lot of concerns about this, because we can't have, we know that very often the limited English speakers are the ones who are the most vulnerable. We've seen lots of studies here and elsewhere. I think that they're working, a lot of the limited English speakers are the ones working the frontline jobs and are the most unstable, maybe the most at risk for infection, and they cannot be left out of any assistance and evicted in mass groups. So if you go to the next slide. So the next aspect of this is the courts. We are, sorry. Sorry. We are talking to our courts about, this is my daughter. We're talking to our courts about, it's already been a difficulty in court in normal times for litigants who are not English speakers and who may have disabilities, especially cognitive disabilities, who may have trouble. So it's difficult in normal times for litigants who have limited English because court moves very quickly. We have eviction court that is very crowded and moves very fast, especially if you have cognitive disabilities on top of limited English. And although the moratorium paused a lot of eviction cases, there are hearings that are going forward, and they're starting to try to figure out how to do remote hearings, and looking towards the end of the moratorium when everyone is concerned about a big uptick in cases. And so we're trying to work with the housing court to develop best practices for how this is supposed to look. What is the way that someone would request an interpreter? One of the examples that was brought to our attention recently was if someone, and we're particularly concerned about this for people who are pro se, who don't have attorneys. You send a set of Zoom instructions to someone, and they send instructions to someone to say, here's how you get to your hearing. And if it's just one email that says, here's how you log on, here's your password, if you can't read that, you could be defaulted and then you could be evicted, and it could be as simple as that. So I think a lot of the concerns that we have about pro se litigants and pro se litigants with limited English apply as well, perhaps even more so here. And so I think that all across the country, people are looking at how remote cases are going to work. And I think we're all kind of looking at these same challenges. And there's actually there's a whole working group dedicated to this, certainly for housing attorneys. And there's just some best practices that are starting to come out as far as what are best practices for judges, what's going to happen with mediation, how do you even get an interpreter, when do you get that interpreter? And I think these best practices will be really important because some of these predated this crisis, but there's a lot of times when a lot of housing cases are settled where a landlord and a tenant will sit in a room and try to mediate, and they'll often have a Spanish-speaking mediator just mediate for a Spanish-speaking tenant and an English-speaking landlord with an attorney. And that's not an appropriate way. It's not an ideal way to do that. You want to have your litigant be able to have their own interpreter, and you should have everything spoken. Everything that anyone says should be translated, preferably not in real time as it's done in court. So I think those types of best practices are the things that we are hoping we can get put into place, and that may have carryover after this is over and be able to maybe do better at language access. So if you go to the next slide. So that's our little case study of the moratorium. And I think, we're hoping that this, like I said, there's just so many aspects of this and so many places to look. And Iris is going to talk a little bit about other creative things that have happened. But, if we can just keep this front of mind, I think that it's definitely the case in many communities, especially where there are a lot of, large communities of, even if they're not large communities, but particular communities, we have even in central Massachusetts, which is not in the Boston area, but we have a a fairly small city where there is a community of indigenous speakers. There's some migrant workers, and they're really off the radar. There's some things that are now available in Spanish, but it's a city that is under-resourced and doesn't really have the capacity or patience to try to figure out how to address their needs, and it really exacerbates a lot of racism and marginalization, which is just something that COVID is just emphasizing that we need to be careful about. So thank you, and I'll let Iris talk about other jurisdictions.
Actually, before you start, Iris, you have to mute yourself, but I just want to say, you probably have not been reading things, Andrea, but you have a huge fan base out there, and thank you for demonstrating one of the realities that we're all dealing with right now. And thank your daughter as well.
Sorry about that. She's usually not quite that weepy, but she wanted to see you all, so thank you.
It's a very depressing subject, so.
Yeah, it is sad.
Yes, but rock on, working mom. That's what I have to say to that. There's many of us, so. So thank you so much for that, Andrea and Althea. And so, as Andrea said, we really need to take this time to re-envision the system and really maximize and capitalize on the urgency that the crisis has sort of brought forward, and really try to advocate for better practices to happen now for the needs that we have for COVID, and also so that they can be sustained after COVID. So lots of things that people are advocating for are things that should have always been happening, but the fact that we can possibly have a better chance at making them happen during the pandemic and thereafter, I think is a really good opportunity for all of us to try to take on. Okay, so now I'm going to give you some examples of how some community organizations and different states and legal services folks and just everybody, I think, really has come together as a village, as they say, to try to respond to these very problems that we're talking about. So there's a worker center in Northampton, Massachusetts, which is in the northwestern part of the state, that took it upon themselves, as I'm sure happened in many other states, our percentage, thousands and thousands, I mean, it multiplied over 200% the amount of folks who were applying for unemployment after COVID-19 happened. And the online portal for our state unemployment system was only in English. Since then, it's been created in Spanish, translated into Spanish, but we still need more. But at the time, the portal was not yet translated into Spanish. So the center created an online tool, to allow Spanish and Portuguese speakers to complete the application on their own. And so it was a very simple tool that they created. They basically just put bubbles literally at the questions and on the online portal. They took screenshots of the online portal and then put bubbles to translate with the questions and how they should be answered by folks. Obviously, it would have been so much more burdensome on the organization to just continue, to complete applications for every single person. So the fact that they were able to do this relieved them of the task of having to do it for everyone. I'm sure there were still folks that were limited, that they needed to help, folks that are illiterate or folks that just aren't computer literate, but this helped a lot in that particular community. Greater Boston Legal Services, also a major legal services in the Boston area, the biggest one. They provide unemployment legal aid when someone is denied unemployment, but at this point, they needed to actually train other agencies to help folks use the online portal system, because even in English, it's very confusing. So they took the time to train others, and for example, within the Greater Boston Legal Services Office is an Asian outreach unit, and they spent weeks just translating for folks to apply for unemployment. So, I mean, these are different ways that people just stepped up to the plate, organizations stepped up to the plate in order for people to get vital services that were needed once this pandemic started, because people just became unemployed. And some of the services were unemployment. There were lots of free meals being offered at schools, at different schools districts, but all the notices about when and how you could access those meals were all in English. So that was something else that community organizations stepped up to the plate and started sending out notices in different languages so that folks knew how to access those meals. Because as Andrea mentioned, a lot of the frontline workers are limited English proficient folks. And these are the people that are going to need all of these services. So another innovation thing, an innovative way that has emerged from all of this is the Senzontle Language Justice Co-op, which is out of Asheville, North Carolina. They have developed a way to stream a Zoom meeting with live interpretation, which we didn't do here, but we hope to have this translated later, the actual Zoom meeting in Spanish, and have the PowerPoint translated in Spanish. But I'm going to show you, it's a very quick video, of a quick YouTube video of how to do this.
How to stream a Zoom meeting with interpretation to Facebook Live without going crazy. To reduce the amount of errors, we recommend having at least 3 people involved in this setup: the host, the interpreters, and the tech person. The host schedules a Zoom meeting or webinar, enables language interpretation, adds interpreters, and starts and stops interpretation during the meeting or webinar. The interpreters interpret in the Zoom meeting. Their only job is to interpret. They will not be able to play another role in this setup. Tech. This is the person in charge of streaming the conversation that is happening on Zoom. They share their screen and audio to Facebook Live. There are certain materials needed depending on the role each person is taking. In general, we recommend that everyone in this setup have a computer with a webcam, good internet connection, preferably connected to the modem through an Ethernet cord. And lastly, being in a quiet place, because any background noise will be picked up and shared in Facebook Live.
Is this all cover good?
Step 1. We need to go open up Chrome or Chrome Beta or Firefox. Once you've opened up Facebook, click on Create Post and then on Live Video. This will take you to the Live Producer page. On the left side of the page, you can decide where to share the video: on your own timeline, a page you manage, or a group of people. You will also be able to select who will be able to see the video. You can choose to show the video to the public, just friends, or even specific friends. On the right side, you'll see the setup options. Click on Start Screen Share. This is how we are sharing the meeting that is happening on Zoom. A window will pop up. Click on Application Window. You should be able to see your Zoom meeting as an option. Select it and then click Share. You are ready to go live. Just click Go Live on the bottom left of your window. The host starts interpretation in the Zoom meeting. Remember, the host should have enabled interpretation when they scheduled the Zoom meeting or webinar. The tech person goes to the Zoom meeting and chooses the language that will be heard on Facebook Live. The tech person cannot be wearing headphones and should be in a silent space. You did it. You streamed a Zoom meeting with interpretation to Facebook Live without going crazy. Hopefully.
Okay, Washington State. So Washington State's governor actually passed a state COVID-19 response language access plan. I don't think that any other state has done this. In April of 2020, The governor passed this in order to ensure that state agencies can provide vital COVID-19 information to individuals with disabilities and with limited English proficiency. The act provides a streamlined new process for agencies to translate vital information related to COVID-19 into the top 37 languages that are spoken in Washington state. It's pretty unprecedented. It would be great if other states could follow this. But this is another example, again, of really stepping up to the plate and providing creative and immediate ways to deal with language access during this pandemic. Also, there's been a federal bill introduced. Not much has happened with it, but it's the COVID-19 Language Access Act, which again requires that everything related to, that agencies receiving federal assistance related to the COVID-19 pandemic should translate any English language written materials no later than 7 days after the material is made available in English. There's certain languages covered. The bill hasn't quite gone anywhere, but the fact that someone thought of it is a good sign. But again, another way of really trying to make all this information about the pandemic, which is vitally important to prevent more incidences of contraction of COVID, so important. And then the Massachusetts Language Access Coalition has been working during the pandemic to mobilize on LEP priorities. We are talking about the creation of a statewide website for LEP individuals and advocates that serve the LEP community, where resources can be found in one place. This is going to be like a long-lasting, permanent website in Massachusetts. We're preliminarily talking about creating such a website, and that would deal with the immediate needs of folks in Massachusetts with regard to COVID and everything that's happening during COVID, but also after the fact. And immediately what's needed and that we're working on now is the creation of a guidance on how to work with interpreters remotely, because that is the new way that everyone is working now, remotely. And so there are many, many challenges to work with interpreters live, and even more challenges to work with them remotely. So we are currently in the process of creating that guidance so that folks, advocates as well as limited English proficient individuals, have those. So just finally, we just want to remind you all that this is an opportunity for change, and that the pandemic really requires us to think in different and creative ways to meet the needs of the limited English proficient community. And there's a lot more work to be done. We all know that, but our lens should be one of opportunity to make long-lasting change, because this opportunity exists and it doesn't always come up. So it's one that we need to really jump on. This is just a couple of resources. I'm going to add more to these resources slide before it's sent to you all, but I just wanted to give you all lep.gov as well as the DOJ LEP guidance for recipients. Again, I'll be adding more to this slides before you get it so that you have more resources. But thank you so much for your time.
Okay, and let me jump in here a little bit as well. We have some questions. I wanted to pass them on. It's about 1 minute before the end of the workshop. Thank you everybody for staying on schedule. I think one of the things that's underlined here, actually we've given something of a demonstration of, is that we're still learning on all of this. You know, certainly this is the first time that this is the first of this kind of workshop we've done, but basically this is a reality that we're all dealing with. So I think the creativity thing is so important. And again, underlying, depending on what state you're in, working with your legislature. Washington is a great example. Work together, but let your legislature, state legislature know this is important. A lot of times people are trying to deal with this, pass laws that have to deal with it, but they don't really get the fact that that there's a language problem very often. And it's incredibly exacerbated by this. It isn't a situation where normally a language access plan would have, if you walk into someone's office, there'd be a sign on the wall that could say in various languages, how to approach to get help. That's not there. Instead, you're dealing with something like this. So it's a time for creativity, also a time to possibly take local initiatives. If you have a problem, there are probably other people in your state, in your region, in your area who have a problem too. Reach out, talk together, initiate conversations. If something needs to be translated, yes, put pressure on whoever's doing the form, doing whatever it is to get it translated properly. But maybe, again, as was shown here, maybe you need to work together where it may be too expensive to translate something for one small group of people, one community group, one agency. Find the other people who are working on this because they have the same problem. Can you work together on it? So again, this is much of an ongoing conversation to do, but it's an important one. Again, I want to thank everyone who's been here so far, and it's 12 o'clock, so technically class is dismissed, but I do have some questions. And let me try to, I think I've gotten most of the ones that have come up along the way, so let me try to pass them on to our presenters, and possibly if you want to hang on for a little bit more, that would be great. One other thing, just real quickly, next Wednesday, if you go to our website, we will be doing a workshop on employment rights and what's happening around those within the COVID virus. Although it's not up yet, on, I believe it is the 25th, which is 2 weeks from today, we will also, and will shortly be opening for registration, have a workshop coming up called The Color of Life in a Time of Crisis. It's really talking about more widely about how this affects people of color, what all that's happening now, both obviously both with the COVID crisis, but also with the reality of the headlines we've been dealing with the last few weeks. And we've been dealing with really on and on and on, how that affects people's lives. So those are upcoming workshops. Look for more. As I say, we will be doing how to do an LAP later, probably in July. So I have, the first question I had from some time back was, what is a private right of action? Can you define that?
A private right of action is basically an action that can be brought by an individual, as opposed to, it can be brought by an individual directly to a court or an agency, as opposed to being brought by an agency on behalf of the individual.
Okay. At some point, the question was, and this was talking about who has to do this. The question was, why is it that most hospitals aren't, that, why did it say that most hospitals is listed as people who needed to comply? Basically aren't LEP patients and caregivers under section 1557.
Yes, section 1557 does apply to hospitals. It really, as far as the federal funding, not every single hospital is federally funded. However, the 1557 regs, unfortunately, under the current administration, have really been stripped of the language access protections for folks. So it's not every single hospital, but the person who's asking the question is definitely correct that 1557 exists, section 1557 of the Health and Human Services regs. However, they've been, we submitted some comments on that when they came out asking for comments, but unfortunately, those regs have really been stripped of the limited English proficient rights.
Okay. This is more of a thoughts between us, but the question was, are there any thoughts on potential changes to the regulations that require language access? I guess this would be more potentially, I think at least legal language, or just what we should be looking when we talk about advocating for with the legislatures and so forth. What should this look like, I guess, is the question.
I'm sorry. I had my window open and a truck went by. Can you repeat that question? Sorry.
Okay, well, as I say, this is an act in progress. Again, the question was, are there any potential changes to the regulations that, any thoughts on potential changes to the regulations that require language access? Again, just kind of, I guess, ideas, thoughts that the panel might have.
To change the laws on language access?
Yeah, I think it's more in terms of what should people be advocating for? What should they be looking for?
Okay, so during COVID-19?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I think that what we need to do is be looking at making sure that agencies are not using COVID as an excuse to not provide language access services. You know, we had an example of somebody who called a particular state court here in our state, and the person needed DV help in Spanish, needed to know how to file a restraining order. And the court basically told them that because of COVID, there were no interpreters available. So that is just unacceptable. So there's a lot of that going on. And so I would say that to make sure to contact, in that situation, I contacted the office of the court that's in charge of making sure that interpreters are available to all courts in the state. And they made an interpreter available for that particular state, for the state court. So that's one thing during COVID-19. I would say also, like, just really try to get information from your community partners. Listen to what they're saying, because they're on the front lines with these folks. And we can write advocacy letters to agencies where we're seeing a group of people that are directly being affected because of a lack of language, whether it be with unemployment or DT, you know, the Department of Public Welfare for your particular state. Those are the ways that we've been sort of working, is really listening to our community partners and listening to legal services organizations that have direct contact with clients to see what the needs are, and then being mobilizing by writing advocacy letters signed on by different agencies and different legal services offices to point out that this is a problem. And in most situations, because of COVID, all of a sudden these agencies, I mean, people want to do the right thing, I think, during COVID. And because of the immediacy and urgency of it, we've gotten some immediate change, and hopefully we're turning that into long-lasting change.
Okay. Another question that was asked at one point, back when you made reference to Google Documents, is, you know, which is, by the way, a wonderful game, is type a sentence, Google Translate rather, but, you know, type a sentence out sometime, translate it to Spanish, from Spanish to German to Chinese, Chinese to Korean, Korean back to English, and find out what, you know, what you originally typed in, how it's changed. It's a great game to play. But anyway, the question was, are there any federally approved entities for updating, translating, and so forth on websites that you know
of? Not that I know of. I'd have to go back and research that. I haven't heard of any. Andrea, have you?
I don't know that there's any kind of approving agency. I mean, I think that, you know, that is something that I feel like there's going to be more of a need for. I think for legal services, we have a double challenge, which is to try to make things digestible in English. There's a lot of things that are not comprehensible in English to begin with, and then translating those concepts is extra difficult. So I don't know that there's any place that would do that, but I think, you know, we need to start thinking about kind of forming partnerships with people who can do a good job of that and do it quickly.
Also, for those of you who receive, you know, either federal or state monies in some ways under like a grant process or something like that, it really makes some sense, because I'm seeing that with some of our own funders have been open to this, of going back and perhaps at least getting permission to reshuffle your budget and just really trying to put this in, because there's, there's no way you could do it. I just had a present grant I was operating under, but a new one starting in August. And essentially we had to almost rewrite and completely redo those grants. And in this case, the funding source was open to doing that. But again, the world has changed. And
John, can I add to that as far as funding goes? I think that, one thing we didn't really talk about specifically, but it's kind of in the background of all of this is technology. And I think that there's, already before all this happened, there was a huge tech divide, digital divide for a lot of our clients and constituents. And I think that this has to kind of go hand in hand with language. It is both a great solution for language access, but also it further can, it can further widen that gap for people who don't have the ability, the means. And I think across the board, people are dealing with this. The schools are obviously struggling with how to do this remote learning and make it equitable. And it's beyond giving someone a Chromebook, right? I mean, you need to have the space, you need to have the, the time and the ability to sit quietly somewhere. And it's the same for, now, people rely heavily on the public libraries and those are closed and things like that. I think to think about really how to actually get every single person some access is part of the challenge.
Mm-hmm. Now, I have one other thing. George has been waiting rather patiently here. He wanted to make a couple of comments, so I'm just going to selectively unmute him, and you should be able to click your own. Now, actually, George, you should be able to speak now if you wanted to.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you very much to everyone. Great presentation, great information here. Couple of questions regarding approved companies or sources providing translation. Yes, they are. I'm familiar with it. There are companies across the country that even federal agencies are contracted. They are federal contractors. Federal agencies are contracted, some of them, with these agencies I'm aware of, some coming from California, and very efficient because it just, I'm not going to go into how that works, but it does work, and I know that they are available. And another thing that I'd like to comment is on the court translators. One of the barriers that I'm aware of it is the required court training for translators. Not anybody who knows how to translate or even is proficient cannot, until it's certified to have the training and be certified to translate in the courthouses. So the barrier is that not too many people have the ability to pay for the training or access the training. So this is something that needs to be worked out with the course, to recruit and make sure that these individuals willing to train can be trained and certified. The other comment I have, if I made, is related to actually that's pretty much it. Thank you. I had another comment.
Okay, thank you, George. The other thing I just want to mention here that hasn't come up directly in the conversation is that there's also a special case for people whose primary language is ASL or whatever the other sign language is Spanish and so forth. And that this is also something that we are going to probably have to figure out to deal with, in that with at least workshops we have done, you'll bring in translators, or we can have translators set up when someone comes into an office. There's a whole other problem for people, and really what's important to keep in mind here is that for a number of people, it's not just a matter of if you type out something or you write something, that's going to fully get the message across. If you have someone who's grown up where ASL is their primary language, it is a language unto itself. And it's in much the same way that you lose the nuances. Somebody who might be, we talked about this very early, but someone who might be capable of normal conversation, understanding, the kind of the day-to-day things of doing business in English, even if when it's not their primary language, you lose the nuances of some of these things when you talk about legal documents, you talk about eligibility rules, you talk about having to fill out a form and so forth. That's different. That's not just simply day-to-day conversation. The same thing applies with ASL. It's something we have to address too. All right, I'm seeing at this point, it's about 1/4 after. I thank everybody for coming. I thank our presenters, Andrea Park, Aris Coloma Gaines. Thank you, Tyler Hadley, for lurking in the background and making sure this first of our workshop series worked well. Again, we will have one on employment rights next week on Wednesday. And thank you so much for all of you for coming. And again, please, let's share with each other. Let's work together. This is particularly important. It's new territory. And as we figure things out to do, let's share what we figured out with everybody else. Thank you very much, and have a good day.